Hello and welcome to the Pre-Game Network News Hole, a series where we recap a few things we heard throughout the week. Not necessarily everything and all the big news you'd expect, but a few things we heard and thought were interesting. Let's get started. On Friday, January 9th, during their first live broadcast of the year, the developers behind the role-playing gacha game Brown Dust 2 announced a series of changes that would be applied to the game in the process of preparing to launch on Steam. A bulk of these changes were focused on censoring multiple paid cosmetic outfits and their associated gameplay cutscenes, the complete removal of a character interaction minigame, and alterations of in-game text such as changing all mentions of school to academy, alongside similar adjustments across the script. This announcement followed an initial failed launch on Steam in December of 2025, where the game accumulated over 200,000 wishlists but was ultimately rejected by Valve due to policy conflicts over its content, including guidelines imposed on Valve directly by different payment processors and activist groups. At the time, the developers canceled the release rather than compromise, stating, "It's better to let the store kill our game than have our players kill it." The surprised reception to this new announcement was overwhelmingly negative, with players and fans calling for a reverse of the decision, demanding refunds, or threatening to quit the game altogether. And while this was going on, the rating of the game took a hit as new negative reviews rolled in. The day following the broadcast, a lengthy response was posted on their developers' notes page, where they placed the blame entirely on the explanation and wording, not the changes themselves. Most notably, the instance where they had let it slip that these changes were to make the game more mainstream. In between the faulty explanations was the announcement of additional outfits being censored. The confused and contradictory messaging expressed that the upcoming changes were the decision of the developers themselves, but also confirmed that they had received external warnings requesting changes to their in-game content. These warnings and listed reasonings included claims of abuse, abusive situations, age-inappropriate styling, or the potential interpretation of such concepts. As is common with activist-backed reasoning of this nature, there was an emphasis on content that could be perceived as underage. This is despite the fact that the characters aren't children, don't resemble children, and most importantly, are not real. While this kind of censorship is unfortunately common, especially as popularity of Eastern properties increases, it's particularly surprising for Brown Dust 2, as its over-the-top erotic elements are ingrained into most actions and nearly every piece of side content in the game, and were often seen as its edge in the gacha space, something that the game leaned into for marketing. Experienced voices noted that these changes and the core audience loss that would follow marked the first steps in a likely decline, as generally speaking, turning your back on a loyal fan base by removing one of your main selling points, one that's tied to the identity of your brand, is rarely good for a game's health and integrity. Another day later, the developers hosted an urgent live broadcast where they walked back all planned censorship and removals, stating that any future situations where normal service would be impossible without content modifications would be handled on a region-to-region basis, with different promotion, service termination in affected areas, and separate modified builds. They noted that this decision would remain the final policy throughout Brown Dust 2's lifespan. Despite the reversal of these changes, responses showed that trust with fans and potential new customers may not be so easy to rebuild. While many are indeed thankful, others pointed out that if they were willing to do this once, it's possible they could be pushed to do it again. And more importantly, before the rollback, the developers had already committed to self-censorship, saying that fans likely wouldn't have to worry about future changes as they now have a clear guideline that they'd be sticking to for future designs, and it's likely that they are still considering these guidelines regardless of the effect it has on content that has already been released. The situation is yet another in a long list of examples where Eastern properties are censored to suit global sensibilities, as well as unknown exactly what culprit is responsible this time. Platforms, payment processors, activist groups, payment processors and activists through platform manipulation, or increasingly restrictive laws of different governments will continue to exert control over creative intent and what customers spend their money and time on, with a particular bias to media from outside the West. Fans and onlookers are left wondering just who pushed for the censorship this time, with many speculating that the governments from countries such as the United Kingdom may have had a hand in this move. As for Brown Dust 2, time will tell if this hidden force that the developers mention but also claim doesn't exist has caused irreparable damage, either through continued, unseen influence, or a permanent stain on the creative process caused by the shock of this situation. And that does it for another episode of the Pre-Game Network News Hole. If you encounter anything you think we'd find interesting throughout the following weeks, send it our way. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.